Okay, here we go, and I want to welcome everyone again. This is Bear Tales 3. This is a relaxing, fun, entertaining evening where you listen to a couple of bear professionals, and I will tell you, I pale in comparison to Kim Delozier. He has so much more experience than I do, but what we hope to do today is tell some stories about bears and possibly other wildlife that we have worked with that are truly remarkable stories, and it'll lead to more questions, more imagination, and more appreciation for the wildlife we work with. Now, before we get into this, there's a number of new folks who have joined in tonight, and some of you may not know who, um, well, most know who Kim Delozier is. Some of you may not know who I am. I'm Daryl Radijak, and I have worked quite a bit with bears. And what I want to do is tell you a little bit about our experience. I will start first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kim Delozier. But uh, I received my degree from the College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse University. This is way back in the early 90s. And I started my career at this little place in East Tennessee called the Appalachian Bear Center. 1997, I moved to East Tennessee and began working with black bear cubs. That little Appalachian Bear Center has grown into an amazing, amazing facility. Now, many of you know it as the Appalachian Bear Rescue. And so I was their first ever manager, and I did that for about 5 years. And that's where most of my bear stories come from. Is I've handled some bears with truly amazing backgrounds and some situations that were just amazing life experiences for me. After about 5 years, I left the Bear Center to more or less begin my career, and I started working for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. Because of that experience I gained while I was at the Bear Center, I was soon promoted to the Big Game Coordinator. And what the Big Game Coordinator was I was in charge of all the deer, bear, and elk in the state of Tennessee. And I did that for about 7 years. And so literally I was the black bear coordinator for the state of Tennessee. After about 7 years, they promoted me once again, made me chief of wildlife. So instead of being over these large animals that I love, I was over all wildlife in the state of Tennessee. With that responsibility, I was learning how to manage bears in all of the entire Southeast. I was part of the large carnivore working group in the Southeast. And so all told, I have about 20 years of working with bears and for bears. And so, like I said, as nice as I think that sounds, I can't hold a candle to my co-host today, who is Kim Delozier. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Kim Delozier for him to introduce himself.
Sure, thank you, Daryl. It's my privilege to be with you guys here too. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of talks before, not many of them on webinars before, so it is a little more comfortable, obviously, than traveling somewhere too. But really, my background is farming. I live on a small farm here in eastern Tennessee, just outside of Knoxville, and really I thought my direction initially was to either be a veterinarian, go into vet school, or either be a farm manager, one or two. And so, kind of my story is I was going down that road to be a vet, and my dad asked me one night, said, "Hey son, you need to come out here, and I want to show you how to treat a prolapsed uterus in a cow." And if you ever watch Dr. Polo on TV, you know what I'm talking about. But prolapsed uterus in a cow is really where the uterus turns inside out, and it looks like a big helium balloon in the back of a cow. So sure enough, I go up there and I said, "Dad, I really don't want to learn how to do this." He said, "No, son, it would be helpful for you." And my dad always tried to push me into learn new things. I said, "Daddy, I'm old enough now. I really found out that I don't want to learn anything else, because I found out the more you know, the more you're going to have to do in the future." So I don't think my plea of my case didn't really do any good. So I go to this cow. She's sitting in this big muddy place. This uterus laying in the mud. It was really pretty gross. Cold, middle of January, freezing cold, nighttime. Push everything back in. There's really not let's say, a scientific way of doing this. You just push everything back in. You push as far as you possibly can. You know when your arm is all the way up in there, you know where other parts are right on your ear. So anyway, we got that taken care of. I remember I pulled my arm back out. We sewed her up. I remember looking at the sky saying, you know what? There's got to be an easier way to make a living than doing this. So the next day I went to the University of Tennessee, and I changed my major over to wildlife and fisheries science. So people ask me kind of how I got started. I said, well, seriously, I really owe my career to the rearing of a cow. And so if I don't tell them the whole story, they look at me really funny. But anyway, I had switched over to wildlife fishery science, graduated from UT. Once I got my undergrad finished, I really had a permanent job in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And it's a very unique deal to have that opportunity to come up because there have been no permanent exclusive jobs for wildlife management in the history of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So I was very fortunate to be there at the right time. So basically took one of 4 permanent jobs, and really my first job I was really a wild boar hunter for the park, going in the backcountry, basically hunting for wild boar that are exotic, do a lot of damage, compete for bears and other wildlife for food. So that was kind of what I did and got started. So I worked in wildlife really for 32 years and retired at the end of 2010 as the supervisor wildlife biologist for the park too. Just a godsend career. If I could go back and do it again, I wouldn't change one thing out, but really work on control with hog control. Bear management was obviously took most of my time. Then we got involved in reintroductions of peregrine falcon in 84, river otter in 86, the red wolf in the 90s, and then starting in 2001 was reintroduction of the elk. And so I've had, I guess you could say, when we're growing up and they say, hey, what would you like to be when you grow up? And well, I've actually got to live that career through. So I feel very blessed to be able to have that opportunity. Retired in 2010, now I work for the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, working on elk restoration throughout the eastern United States. Right now we have 58 elk in Arizona. They'll be moved to Logan, West Virginia, as part of the restoration project. We got another 27, I think that's right, 27 that land between the lakes in western Kentucky. That'll be moved up there as well. So we're part of that whole project up there in West Virginia. We also have elk in Missouri, and of course Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, and now West Virginia too. So that's really good. And I mentioned before, I also teach classes on animal capture, chemical immobilization for a company out of Washington State called Safe Capture International. So that kind of in a nutshell is kind of what I do. I do have a couple of books out. Carolyn Jordan is the co-author of the book. She's on the call, and I appreciate you jumping in here, Carolyn. And she's just a great writer. Has several books out too, and tell you how much I knew about writing books. Once we had the book out for a while, Bear in the Backseat 1, Carolyn called me and said, hey, Kim, I just want to let you know we made the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And I said, was that good, Carolyn? She said, oh, yeah, that's pretty good. I can tell you that. So she's really the spirit of the books, too. And the books are written both in dialect. They're available on Amazon if you haven't ever seen those. They've been number 1 in the top 3, really, for the past several years on their books on Amazon, too. So I've been pretty blessed with that. We have 3 more books coming out. Bear in the Backseat, the final chapter, or book number 3. Another book called Halt Park Ranger. We interviewed people who used to poach in the park back in the 50s and 60s. And it was really a way of life at that time, and it doesn't happen now. So we interviewed a lot of those, and it's kind of a cat and mouse chase between the park rangers and poachers. So we do that. We got another one called The Wild Man of Cataluci, a guy who lived a life that's just unbelievable too. So if you remember the movie Nail, this is kind of a male version of Nail, if you saw that movie before. So that'll come out hopefully sometime here in the near future. So that's kind of my background. Daryl, anything else you want to add?
No, I think that was fantastic, and I hope we have given all the participants comfort in knowing that the 2 gentlemen who are speaking to you tonight have quite the background with not just bears but wildlife in general, and I am positive I'm speaking for Kim as well when I say we are some of the 2 most blessed individuals you will ever meet. The fact that we're able to do this for our career and spend our lives doing this, I tell Kim all the time that I continue to pinch myself because I can't believe I was able to do exactly some of those things I did. So speaking for Kim, I think we are just more grateful than anyone for the careers that we had. So having said that, I'm going to move forward so we can get this thing underway. But I do want everyone to know, Kim Delozier and I will be sharing stories about black bears. Not every single story will be from this area, but most of the stories that you're going to hear will involve bears or other wildlife in East Tennessee. That's where I spent the majority of my career. I believe Kim spent all of his career, but we have traveled all over. For those that don't know, I'm no longer in Tennessee. I've always wanted to live and work in the Rockies, and so I'm actually in northern New Mexico right now, living a dream. But Tennessee is always near and dear to my heart because that's where I spent much of my career. But most of the stories that we will be relating to you tonight will be where that star is in eastern Tennessee, has a tremendously healthy bear population as well as other wildlife. But what I plan to do, and I'm actually going to let Kim start us off. What I plan to do is I'm going to jump out of this presentation really quick, and I'm going to start a slideshow, which will run probably for about 60 minutes. It'll kind of be our cue when me and Kim should start wrapping it up. But it's going to consist of all it is bear photographs. And I've been blessed to know some amazing wildlife photographers that have allowed me to use their photographs. And so while I'm explaining this, I'm going to switch over to that presentation because I want that to run in the background so you can see some of the amazing work of some of my friends that have allowed me to use their presentations or their photographs. And so this is going to run, and you just sit back, relax, enjoy, and Kim and I are going to start telling you stories about bears we have worked with. And every so often, we are going to take a break between stories and ask for your direction. We want to find out what you want to hear about and where you want to go. And so with that, Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you. So if you have a story to tell, you can be the lead here, and we'll go wherever the public wants us to go.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Thank you, Daryl. Well, like I said, having the privilege of working with bears in the park, when I first started in the park, back in 1978, there really wasn't a book out there how you manage bears, how you deal with, millions and millions of people and trying to protect bears from all the people too. Of course, the park last year had over 11 million visitors in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's really more, I think, than the next three national parks combined. So tremendous amount of visitation. They bring in a lot of garbage, and as you might guess, there's the opportunity for encounters, both positive and negative, are pretty high there in the Smokies too. When I got started in the late 70s, the bear population was estimated to be between 200 and 400 animals. And so today, like I say, it's probably 4 times that many. So it's changed a big, over the past 35 years or so. If you're thinking about bears, if you equate intelligence to the size of a brain, then primates would be number 1 in intelligence. Guess what's number 2? Bears are number 2. And surprising to me, actually, pigs are number 3. So working with bears, working with pigs too, obviously it was a challenge. I always say, most of our visitors are smarter than the average bear, and I used to think they were, but after I was there about 3 decades, I started to doubt myself after I heard what some of the people actually were doing. But I tell you what, most people, I think, are very naive about biology, very naive about wild populations. I think that a lot of the wild animals, bears and deer and things, build a campfire at nighttime. They all get together and, sing songs at nighttime before they go to bed. But we know that's not true. But a lot of people really just are very uneducated about wild animals and how they live. I tell people it's a jungle out there. It really is. It's a tough place to make a living. The mountains are even a tougher place to make a living because food has a limiting source there. It's all survival and even reproduction is tied into fall foods, and that's acorns. We used to have the American chestnut. We lost that out there, so now acorns, which are not quite as predictable as we had with the American chestnut. When we have great white oak mass crops or white oak crop of acorns too, I mean, that equates into a lot of bear cubs. All of the mother bears will have, 2 or 3 cubs too. The most we've ever recorded in the park on cubs has been 5 cubs. I'd like to think those were wild cubs, raised on wild foods, but I have my doubts whether that's true or not. They may have had some supplemental food from Kentucky Fried Chicken or other places as well too. So it's really been a battle. It's really been a battle, I think, in the park for many, many years, trying to keep bears and people separated too. And I said how smart they are. There's a bear, obviously, the cherry tree. Usually the first and second week of August is the time when cherries will be ripe. And if you're looking for bears and the cherries are abundant that year, you'll see bears because they're all up off the ground. You'll see them in the cherry trees in early to mid-August. I just thought of one story. I mentioned before that I worked on hog control, and once I kind of moved into the office and started hiring people, I had one guy from Pennsylvania who was always loved to ask questions. He never, he'd say, well, should I do this or should I do that? Well, I told the guy, I said, well, look, I need you to go to Tricorner Knob, which is on the Appalachian Trail. We've got a lot of hog activity up there. So these guys go up there basically with a shotgun, and they go up and they stay Monday through Thursday night, come out Friday morning, and they walk the trails after dark looking for pigs doing damage. And so, of course, most of the people are going to be in the shelter or going to be in a campsite. They're not going to be out on a trail. So it's a pretty safe thing. Well, Gary, this guy who had worked for me, he went up there, and I got this radio call and said, hey, this is so-and-so, I think 403, and I'm up at Tricorner Knob. And he said, I come up here, and, typically when you hike in the backcountry, your shirt will just get wringing wet with sweat. Then you hang it up, it'll dry out, and you'll see little deposits of salt on your shirt. Well, a lot of the wild animals in the park are salt deficient. And so apparently, when I was sitting there, Gary called me and said, hey, Kim, I'm at Tricorner Knob, and I hung my shirt on the line to dry, and a bear came in and stole my shirt off of the line here. Well, I mean, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say. I thought for a second, and the guy was, I said, what does he expect me to do? And I shouldn't have said this, but I said, well, Gary, all I can tell you is to go up to the trail junction and tell any of the hikers if they see a bear that's wearing a Park Service shirt with your name tag and your badge, it's probably your shirt. And I said that to him over the radio, and he paused for a second and said, 10-4, thanks a lot, and hung up. So anyway, but these bears actually, it got his shirt, it took off. We never retrieved his shirt, his badge, his name tag at all, too. But anyway, that was kind of a story I thought I had just wrote a few things down, too. I thought was pretty interesting, too. I've got several stories here. I've got one here. It deals with cubs. These bears really don't go through a true hibernation. They go through, they slow down tremendously, and they go through a sleep, but I wouldn't say they stay hibernating for the whole year. So they're not really true hibernators. So we had a lot of these mother bears will den actually right near a very busy highway. And so if you've ever been to Cades Cove before, Laurel Creek Road goes from Townsend in Tennessee over into Cades Cove, which is a kind of limestone area. It's an 11-mile loop around that. Just that one area of the park, they exceed over 2 million people visit that park that one section of the park every single year. So a tremendous number of people, but there's a lot of wildlife there too. A lot of bears, a lot of turkey, a lot of deer, and so anyway. We had one area that somebody called and said, hey, there's 2 little bear cubs up here at Crib Gap, which is just before you get into Cades Cove. And so I sent a guy out there, too. I sent Dan out there. I said, Dan, go out there and try to figure out what's going on, if they're orphaned. He actually went out there, and these 2 little cubs were right beside the road. I mean, tiny, just a really 2 or 3 pounds. So he picked them up and looked up, and he could see this steep bank going up to where it looked like there was some disturbance at the top. He climbed the top of it, and sure enough, there was the mother bear in a ground den that she kind of excavated herself. Sometimes we'll find a root ball where a tree is blown down. They'll excavate underneath that and make a little cavity and climb back up under there. That's what she had done. So he looked there, and you can wake them up. You can disturb these bears that are sleeping, and the closer they are to, let's say, March or so or April, the more prone they are to jump up and run off, and they may even desert their cubs. So Danny went up there. He said, "Look, I just I don't know. I got me a stick and kind of put them at the entrance to the den there, and I kind of pushed the little cubs back into her, and she kind of pulled them back in, and accepted them too. And so we thought we were okay. Well, the next day, guess what? We get another report that said, "Hey, there's 2 bear cubs up here at Crib Gap on the side of the road." So Dan went back out there again, and sure enough, he picks them back up, climbs back up the bank, and the mother's lying in there, and so he puts them inside with her, and then he builds a little bitty fence out of sticks and logs around that thing to try to keep them in the yard, so to speak. So he put them in there too, and we waited a couple weeks after that, 2 or 3 weeks after that, we're back and checked on her, and the mother had actually woke and was actually left with the cubs, and so we hope that was a happily ever after story as well too.
Are you done with that, Kim?
Yeah, I sure am.
Okay, well, I can chime in because you reminded me of a couple of things from my past. Kim had mentioned about hibernation, and bears are not true hibernators. And just so you know, I teach a whole separate class about bear hibernation. I call it nature's super sleepers, because what a bear does throughout the hibernation is absolutely phenomenal and fantastic, and no other animal does some of the things that bears can do. And so if you get a chance to view that webinar, it's wonderful. But speaking of hibernation, in my past life when I was working at the Appalachian Bear Center, our primary goal was to rehabilitate some of these orphan cubs that would come in because either mom got hit by a car or this cub showed up somewhere, and it just needed a little boost from us as far as getting the cub to be a little bit bigger size before it could be on its own and self-sufficient. And so usually when we got cubs in at the Bear Center, either TWRA, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, or the National Park Service, they would bring me these orphan cubs that were anywhere from 15 pounds to maybe 30 pounds, and we would just keep them for a few months, fatten them up, and turn them loose. Every once in a while, we would get our hands on neonatals. And what neonatals are, Kim mentioned about bears hibernating. You have to understand that female bears, this is one of the amazing things about the biology of black bears, is the mating season occurs in early summertime. And the male and the female bear get together, and those eggs get fertilized in the early summertime, but even though it's a fertilized egg, that egg does not implant and begin growing inside that female bear's uterus until the fall. That process, I'm going to be a nerdy biologist here, but that process is known as delayed implantation. But it's an evolutionary adaptation, because this is what's so remarkable, is what the bear's body is doing is it is waiting to see whether or not the female bear is going to be healthy enough to carry those cubs to full pregnancy. Because understand, hibernation and going without food for 3, 4, 5 months is extremely taxing on a bear's body. Now, if a female was to give birth while she's hibernating and she was not in good condition, then it could be dangerous not just for the cubs but for the female bear itself. And so her body is more or less waiting until it knows that she has enough fat to survive the hibernation. And so those eggs won't implant until sometime around in November, because at that time something triggers it. They know her body either has enough fat. If it does not have enough fat, she reabsorbs those eggs or passes those eggs, and she never becomes pregnant. So if she does have enough fat on her and those eggs implant inside her uterus, you have to understand, they implant in November. They only have November, December, January to grow. So they only grow for a couple of months, and then she gives birth in late January, early February. And so understand that egg only has a couple of months to grow. And so when these cubs are born, they're tiny. They're usually all born within about a 2-3 week period. Again, right in the middle of the mother's hibernation. And so we call those really small, tiny, helpless cubs neonatals. And for the most part, we never get to see those. Bear researchers that visit bear dens get to see those, but the public never gets to see those really tiny cubs because they're in the middle. They're in the middle of the hibernation, deep inside a bear's den, along with mom. But every once in a while, something bad happens. And one of the things that happened to me when I was at the Bear Center, I received a call from the agents in North Carolina, and they told me of a situation with 3 neonatal cubs. And what had occurred was a logger was cutting some trees and cut down this tree, didn't realize that there was a female bear hibernating inside the tree. Now, it didn't kill the mother, but it was enough of a scare that she abandoned her cubs. And there they were, just a couple of days old, these 3 neonatal bears, and they had no idea what to do with them. And most states don't have the facilities, and that's what the Bear Center was designed to do. So I received a call about these 3 really, really tiny cubs from New Bern, North Carolina. And so it literally took, before all the paperwork was done, it took 4 or 5 days before we received those cubs. Now they were caring for them. The authority in North Carolina was caring for them, but they delivered these little neonatals to me, and they were like between 8 to 10 ounces when I received them. Think a half a pound. A human baby is born anywhere from 5 to 7 to 9 pounds. These little baby bear cubs were only about a half a pound. And it was one of the coolest things. I remember they delivered them to my doorstep in East Tennessee in this little crate. And believe it or not, one of the slideshow pictures that we'll show is actually a picture of those neonatals. And because they're so small, obviously they're dependent on humans. They need us to feed them. We had to bottle feed them. And I did that for a number of weeks. And we were fortunate that the University of Tennessee and Dr. Mike Pelton, they were doing numerous studies inside the national park as well as the surrounding areas. And they had lots of female bears with radio collars on them. And so what my job was to care for these little neonatal cubs until we could find surrogate mothers in the wild to adopt them. And that's what we did. I had them for a few weeks, and I remember when the first call came in, and they said they had located a female bear inside Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and they asked if they could foster one of those cubs to that bear. And so my job was, actually the very first one, I take that back, it wasn't in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. It was a place called the Big South Fork National Wildlife Refuge, which is north of Knoxville. They had located a female bear that had given birth, and she had 3 cubs of her own, but she was really, really healthy, so she was able to take on that 4th cub. And I remember loading up that cub, and I had to meet the bear researchers, which included Dr. Frank Van Manen, who is now the head of the grizzly bear research team, and the grizzly bear interagency team here in Yellowstone, and another person by the name of Jay Clark, who I worked with quite a bit. Kim knows him well, fantastic gentleman. And we had to hike to this bear den, and I had to carry this little neonatal cub. And it was an awesome feeling. The fact that we were going to find a surrogate mother to take care of this bear was going to give that cub the best chance for surviving. And I remember getting out of my Jeep, and while the other researchers were loading up their backpacks with their immobilization drugs, their radio collars, all the gear that they required, the only gear I was carrying was more or less this little tiny bear cub and a few supplies like an extra bottle. But I didn't want to give that cub the bottle because I wanted to make sure it was really, really hungry. So when we did foster it to the female, hopefully that cub would latch on right away and begin nursing. And so that bottle was a backup plan that we never intended to use unless the mother didn't accept it. We would take the cub back and I would have a bottle to feed it. But the intention was not to use that bottle. And so because the cub did not eat for a long time, he was squalling like crazy. He was hungry. And so think about trying to approach a bear den in the middle of nowhere, climbing up this mountain. And you understand, we already knew this female had cubs of her own because the researchers had visited her a few days earlier. And what was in my coat pocket was this other tiny bear cub that was just screaming and squalling away. And so it wasn't too bad. I figured what I could do is I could hang back in the background and wait until the researchers located the den again and sedated the mother. And then once she was asleep, it wouldn't be as stressful with this squalling cub in my hand. And so as we're hiking up the hill, the gentleman who was leading the way, Jay Clark, he told me, he said when he found the den earlier, he approached it from a different direction, so things weren't looking familiar. And sure enough, the cub was still screaming and crying because it was so hungry. And as we're looking for this bear den, and I was planning on staying about 100 yards back, so the female bear didn't hear this cub crying, Jay grabbed my arm and he said, "Don't move." I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Keep the cub quiet." And we looked out, and we were literally probably 6-7 feet away from the bear den. We had approached it from a different direction, and it didn't look familiar. And it just so happened that the cub had quieted down for a little bit, which thankfully, it probably wouldn't have been bad, but it's one of those things you don't want to be standing outside a bear den with a cub in your hand that's crying with a mother bear that had just given birth. But I was able to back away, and the researchers were able to sedate the mother, pull her out. Hey, actually, that picture you see there, those are the bears I'm talking about. One of those bears was in my hand at this time. And so after the researchers pull out that bear and they sedate the mother, they'll take measurements on her, we'll take measurements on her cubs. When we're all done, it doesn't take that long because we don't want to spend a lot of time there. But what we were doing, we were using this little trick of when we were all done, we would take Vicks Vapor Rub and we'd smear it all over the top of the mother's natural cubs as well as the orphan cub. And we'd put all the cubs back in the den with her and we'd leave. And what that is for, everyone assumes it's to cover up the human scent, which it would do that. But the main thing there is we just wanted to make sure when mom woke up after being sedated, she woke up and she would smell this. And that same smell was on all of her cubs and the orphan cub. And most people understand Vicks Vapor Rub, it has that minty smell, and it smells kind of good, and bears will eat anything. We didn't want the female to eat the cubs, but she would lick the cub to get that ointment off the cubs. And as she's licking and cleaning those cubs, she's putting her scent back onto the cub. And so little does she know, she comes up to that orphan cub, licks that orphan completely clean, and she marks that cub with her scent. And from that point forward, nobody's going to take that cub away from her. And so that's how we did some of these releases with some of those neonatal cubs in the wintertime. So that's one of the cool things. And like I said, I could talk about bear hibernation all day long. It's an incredible thing. But with that, I think we've gone probably 15 minutes or so. Kim mentioned a couple stories. I told you about some of this, the rehab work with those neonatal cubs. Does anyone have any questions about some of the things that Kim has mentioned in a couple of stories or this neonatal story? By all means, we would love for your input because your input is going to help us guide where our next stories go.
Daryl, I mean, while people are thinking about that, let me add to what you just talked about too. Really, of course, before that, the very first orphan cub that we placed with a surrogate mother actually was just above park headquarters there near Gatlinburg, and we really didn't know. We'd never done this before. This was back in the 80s, and so we knew where some of the mothers were because they have radio collars, and when they den, you can go in the den and basically determine if they've had cubs or not. So that we had a good mother pretty close to the road, across the creek up on the bank there. I remember we took this little orphan cub over there, and we didn't put any Vaseline there on it, anything, a Vicks Vapor Rub, nothing on it really, not knowing for sure. Gary Alt, who was the bear manager in Pennsylvania at that time, a great researcher, had actually had some success with this. So I remember climbing up to the edge of the den, looking in, and the mother was curled up, and she'd raise her head and look at you. They kind of go in slow motion, so to speak. And these bears will not necessarily stay in the same den the entire winter. They will actually change locations, and because either the might be disturbance from a dog or from an animal, or it may be flooded from too much rain, and they move it from one place to another. And typically they don't go back to the same den. They rarely ever use the same den from one year to the next. So I'm crawling up there, looking inside, a little uncomfortable. I'd never done this before. So that's a little bitty tiny cub, just a few pounds in weight. So I put it on the edge of it. Of course, it can just barely move. I have a big long catch pole. It's probably 6 foot long. I have the noose on the end of it. So I kind of lay the noose here and put a little bear cub kind of in the middle of it. And I start to slowly push it inside the den to the mother. Now, I really don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure if she's going to accept it, if she's going to, bite it, kill it instantly. We really didn't know. So it was just kind of a trial and error. Hopefully she would accept it. And sure enough, I slid in there, and the closer I got, the more interested the mother got. And when I got over where she could smell it, she raised up, and I thought for sure she may actually going to bite it or kill it, but she reached out, took her one of her front legs, and it was like she was raking in, winnings at a casino. She pulled it all the way underneath there too, and raked it underneath there, and immediately the little cub started nursing her too. And if you've ever heard a cub nursing a mother, you can actually, if you walk by a tree that there's a mother bear there that the cubs are nursing, you can actually hear it. I tell people, I describe it's kind of like you remember the old typewriters we used to have, the old electric typewriters, even manual. It sounds like it's one of those that's going in wide open gear and it's stuck. It's a wide open runaway typewriter, and that's kind of what I always equate that sound to. But it's really good. But that was successful. She took the cub. And that was kind of the first time that we had done that inside the park, and of course many more times after that.
Yeah, and Kim, I'm glad you mentioned Gary Alt, because that's where we kind of got the idea. The whole thing with the Vicks Vapor Rub is kind of, it probably isn't necessary. It was more or less one of those insurance things, just to make sure that things didn't smell different. But female bears, in the middle of that hibernation, they're kind of out of it, and they don't know what's going on, and they're not going to, they have a very strong motherly instinct, and so we feel very confident with most of those surrogate mothers that we placed those neonatals with. So let's answer some of the questions. I'm going to, Kim, we could alternate here. Lori Gunter was the one that asked the first one. She said, would a mother bear miss a cub that was lost? And I haven't had much experience, and Kim, actually, this might be more of what you can answer. Obviously, there's no hard data to tell you what a bear is feeling, but having observed bears, and I literally lived with bears for 5 years, if you are observing them on a daily basis, you can see different moods that the bears are in. Sometimes they're playful, sometimes they're sad. So I cannot speak exactly for what a bear is feeling, but just with those observations I had, you can't help but feel that they have some type of emotions that they go through. And you will hear cubs bawl for one another, especially cubs will bawl quite a bit. And so I have no doubt that there's some type of emotional attachment there, but I don't believe it's anywhere near as strong as what humans have. But I definitely believe that females just care for their cubs.
Yeah, I might add kind of stories on both ends of there. Cubs that are lost or something. Do they know they've lost it? Well, I had. Going home from park headquarters one day, I was going to the bypass around Gatlinburg, and now I went around the curve, and here was a mother bear with some cubs crossing the road, and so we all stopped. Everybody was watching them. Well, I thought there was just like 3 cubs, but apparently there were 5 cubs in this group, And so the mother takes off running, and she runs across the road with 3 of the cubs, and she looks around like she's just counting, like 1, 2, 3, well, where's 4, where's 5? So she looks back across and runs back across the road, gets the other 2 cubs, and leads them across the road. So she knew how many cubs she had when she left. Now, on the flip side of that, we picked up cubs before in a ditch that we took it, and it had neurologic problems. I think it's a survival instinct. If you have a runt or you have one that has something wrong with it, the mother may just leave it. And that's just what they do to be able to protect their other cubs. They don't want an animal there that really is drawing attention to it by other bears. For example, male bears will try to kill the cubs if they get to them. So obviously, I think some cases they're very, very protective. I think the older the mother, the more protected she is of her, the better mother she's going to be. Kind of like in humans, sometimes it's the same with a human situation. You know, the younger the mother, sometimes they're really good mothers, and sometimes they don't have that strong motherly instinct is what you would hope too. So anyway, but I've had 2 kind of flip sides of that too. I think they know when they lose one, sometimes that it may be intentional. They may want to actually leave a cub that's having some problems, whereas if they've got all there, yeah, she's going to do her best to be able to protect those. I personally think that mother bears, as the black bears, are as protected of their cubs as what most people think they are. It depends on the mother. I'll just say that. It depends on the mother how strong they're willing to do that. Now, I wouldn't want to pick up a cub and squeeze it and have it start screaming help from mother, because I can imagine we're going to get a response when that happens too. But for the most part, they know what they've got, I think too, and they recognize if they lose a cub.
Okay, I'm going to knock out a couple of questions really quick. One, Lori asked how much Vicks Vapor Rub we used. It was just enough to smear on the top of the cub's head and on its back, so it was just a little dab. It was more or less just to put that minty smell on it, so it wasn't very much. Then Brad and Sandy asked about what causes bears to smell so strong, and I don't know what side you're on, whether or not the bear smells bad, because believe it or not, some bears smell really bad, or their sense of smell being so strong. If it's the latter, I've got another presentation that goes into that, but if you could clarify what you meant by that question. And then I'll do another one really quick about Bev asked whether or not we've had experience with a dangerous encounter with a bear. I will tell you that I've never personally felt threatened or in danger with an encounter with a wild bear. Now, I have had situations where a bear I was working with was kind of waking up quickly, and you got to make sure you're not there when it wakes up. Sometimes they go into a rage, but I personally have never had a dangerous encounter. Kim, you could have probably more stories than I do in that regard.
Well, you know what? I guess it depends on what you mean by dangerous too. I've never been what you say injured by a bear. And I have situations before where I felt threatened by a bear. Now, if at some point I could spend the whole hour talking about near misses, where a bear actually was going after some people, but they responded the correct way and actually kind of showed dominance over that bear and ran the bear off. But that's not always true. So I've got numerous stories about encounters with bear that really were close. They were close encounters, and they were near misses from a full-blown attack as well, too. I'll tell you one story. My first year when I was working in 78, and I forgot who it was. It was from Gatlinburg, from Memphis, but anyway, I'll tell you something. When I went to work in 1978, if you've ever been through Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, you know how many red lights and how much development and go-kart tracks and miniature golf is there, too. And when I went through Pigeon Forge in 1978, there were 0 red lights in Pigeon Forge. So obviously there's been some pretty major changes from that time. But anyway, it's hard to say. This one time I was working up at Gregory Ball. I was in the backcountry. It's off of the Appalachian Trail. And I remember I was walking about just right at dusky dark looking for wild boar too. And I saw this white-tailed deer come running across the trail. And I looked behind her, and I could see this huge black bear walking through the vegetation with his head just above the vegetation kind of going back and forth with his head kind of going back and forth like this. And so I said, you know what, I'll have some fun with this bear. So when he got closer to the trail, I blew at him, which is an alarm signal for a white-tailed deer. So I blew at him. That blow, when I did, he stopped. He looked directly at me, made a 90-degree turn to the left, and came straight towards me. Now, I really hadn't planned on that happening, or I wouldn't have done what I did. And so he kept on coming, and he was a really big bear, kept closer and closer. When he hit the trail, and I had a shotgun with me, and they would probably fired me if I'd done this, later on, but it was my first year there. But this bear hit the trail, was walking straight towards me, and the wind was blowing in my face. So it couldn't smell me, but he had his head up, kind of going back and forth like this, like he was trying to sense what I was. Well, I kept backing up, and I said, okay, bear, it's me. I'm sorry for what I did, but I'll never do it again. I kept on going back, and finally my voice and the intensity of my voice got louder and stronger, too. And finally I was screaming, hey, bear, get back, bear. And he come within probably, I'm going to guess 7 or 8 feet of me, and he got close enough that I felt like something was going to have to give. And so I discharged my shotgun over top of his head. And when I did, not to shoot him to hit him, but just to scare him, and he stopped, didn't flinch, didn't take off running. He stopped and like stuck his nose up and started bobbing his nose looking at me, and slowly turned around and walked back down the trail. Well, you could have touched me, and I would have fallen like a big tree hitting the ground, too. I mean, I was literally shaking, too. I'd never been around a big bear that way, that responded that way. So, obviously, this bear was in attack mode. He was in predator stealthy mode, trying to get close enough to that white-tailed deer to kill it. And I intervened, and that was the first and last time that I ever did any vocalizations to a black bear. So, they have killed people, and they will kill people in the future. It's extremely rare. Predatory behavior in a bear is extremely rare, but it is a possibility, and you need to be prepared of how you should respond to it if it happens.
Hey, I'm going to chime in with probably one of my least favorite encounters with a bear. And Kim, you don't know this story, but I need your help because I'm not recalling a campground. A year or two before I left Tennessee, I had taken my family up to see the fireflies over at Elkmont Campground, and I was talking to Bill Stiver, and there was no more room left in the tour buses, and he told me a campground to drive to that there's just as many fireflies up there. It's somewhere north of Gatlinburg. I don't know if you know what campground I'm talking about, but
yeah.
My family and I, we had driven there, and we got there about an hour before it got dark. And so we parked. We took a little walk. There was a couple of cars in the parking lot, and we took a little walk to the stream, and my son was playing in the stream. And then we started heading back to the parking lot where our vehicle was. And lo and behold, me and my one son were up ahead, and there was a large bear in the parking lot just making his rounds from one grill to the next, just scoping things out. And it didn't faze me, but I knew that my wife and other son were coming up the trail, so I went back and I warned them. I said, hold on, there's a bear in the parking lot. Anyway, I reunited with the whole family, and they got into our van, and by this time there's only 1 or 2 cars there. And this bear, it's not good for a bear to be wandering around a campground or a picnic area in the middle of the
picnic area, correct.
Yes. And so I wanted to scare the bear away. And so I yelled at it. I threw things at it. He was near one of the dumpsters, and so I picked up a big rock. I didn't throw it at the bear, but I threw it at the dumpster to make a really loud noise. And the bear flinched, but he didn't move. He was not going to leave that picnic area. And so eventually he wandered off. And it got dark. When the fireflies came out, there's only 2 vehicles there. There's my van and the vehicle next to me. And here we were wanting to watch the fireflies in pitch black because that's when the best show is. And as my family and I were sitting on the hood of our van, I heard something moving to my right. Couldn't see. It was one of those moonless nights, so I couldn't see. And all of a sudden, I hear this charging come, and it stopped literally probably 10 feet from me to my right, and I could hear him huffing and popping. And he came right at us. And I knew exactly what it was, and I knew that he was a decent sized bear. And he stopped. I couldn't see it, but he was in the bushes right next to me, and he did not want me there because this picnic area was his turf. And I calmly got my family, walked around the other side of the van, put them in the van, and the people in the car next to me said, "What's going on?" I said, "There's a bear here in the bushes that's not very happy." And they're like, "No, no." I said, "Do you happen to have a flashlight?" And they handed me a flashlight, and sure enough, I shined it, and he was literally 10 feet from our van. And he, like I said, he came running out. We weren't doing anything other than sitting there. And he came running out just to let us know that this was his turf. And I remember we sat in the van the rest of the time. We ended up leaving, and just so you know, I called Bill Stiver and I reported that, and knowing the source, Bill trusted my observation. They went in and they ended up trapping that bear and moving it out of that area because you can't have a bear that's kind of claiming that picnic area as his own. So they ended up moving that bear away. So I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of the other questions, if there's anything you wanted to address, Kim.
Yeah, Lori, I did see your one there, about, like I mentioned before, and I didn't know about this particular one at ABR cub that had been left behind by the mother because it had problems. I had the one that had neurologic problems too, and we didn't know it until we took it to the vet school and had examined and stuff too, did some examination, and it had some neurologic problems. It was blind as well too, but apparently I'm just guessing that probably the mother, we actually found her in the ditch. We carried up in the woods, and we thought maybe it just got separated from its mother. She may have, just emerging from the den, but we took it back up there, left it there, and came back the next morning to see if it, in fact, had reunited with its mother, and it had rolled back down the hill, was in the ditch, and we found out that the little cub was blind. And so I don't know what happened before that, but my guess is they probably couldn't keep up with the mother and its other, brothers and sisters. So my guess is it probably was just left behind too. And Desiree, why did male bears want to kill the cub? It's really a territorial thing. It's just the way they protect their territory by killing other animals, other cubs in particular. I can tell you several stories related to that. Jeannie had a question about, a young mother with such a young mom know what to do. Well, there's not an easy answer for that. I'm going to say it depends on the mother. The younger the mother, let me say, probably the more she has to learn. I'll tell you one story. We were moving bears, and Daryl had mentioned Big South Fork. We were actually moving bears in the summertime and in wintertime from Glacier Monkey National Park to this new park who had a growing bear population. And so bears, young males, were moving out of Kentucky into that upper Cumberland, which is northwest of Knoxville, right on the Kentucky-Tennessee line. And so we were doing a research project trying to see, if a summer release versus a winter release was better to try to move a family group of bears to this location, because typically they're going to try to come back, to where their home territory is. And so we basically compared summer releases and winter releases. I remember one in I think this was in the early summer. Let me take this back. This was in late winter. We had a young mother that had one cub, and we had a film crew there. If any are from this area, we have the Heartland series, which is a little production that produces like 3 minutes or 3 or 4 minute production twice a day. Anyway, they cover all the natural and cultural stories of the Smokies. But anyway, we had a ladder we carried in the backcountry. We carried this ladder, climbed up, and we had probably almost a 16-foot climb up to the notch of the tree. And typically what's unique about bears that hibernate in the Smokies is that with the mature forest there, many of the mothers will den 30, 40, 50 feet off of the ground in a hollow notch up in a huge poplar tree. So we climbed up there too, and the sound guy from the film crew had lowered a mic down to the bottom of him. You could hear the little cub just going wide open nursing. He was really, really happy. And so what they were going to do was go in there and take a long pole syringe, which is really a syringe on the end of a pole, push it down in there, and then they were going to inject it and then have the mother to sleep, then go in, try to get the mother out, get the cub out, take them back to take the Big South Fork, and then put them in new dens up there. Well, I was watching the whole thing, watching kind of what was going on, and I remember the sound guy, he kind of grabbed his earphones like this for a second, and he looked around. He said, "She's coming out. She's coming out." And I mean, boy, he threw the headphones down, and he went down that ladder wide open. The next thing we knew, this mother bear come up over the opening of that den, and she jumped, and it looked like a giant flying squirrel. I had no idea how long she actually went through the air and hit the ground. She hit the ground running, and we never saw that bear ever again. We had a collar on her. We could get close to her, could never get close to her at all. We actually took that cub. Of course, when we felt for sure she was going to desert it, we went back the next day and looked to see if she'd come back, and she had not. But the next day, we then put that little cub with another mother up at Big South Fork, which she accepted, and it did really well too. So it just depends on the mother. I think the younger they are, the more they have to learn. But the older they are, I think more protective, and the better moms they tend to be.
I will just make one more comment to finish off answering some of these questions. That ABR cub that you were talking about before, just so everyone knows, Janet, who joined in, who responded, and she said, Lori, that particular cub had hydrocephalus. Janet is the curator at ABR, and I appreciate Janet coming on. I wish we really need to equip you with a microphone, Janet, so you could chime in and answer some of these ABR questions if we can't answer them. So thanks for joining in. All right, I believe we have most of the questions answered. We'll look back, but if we want to move on, we'll kind of change gears. And Kim, do you have another story you want to kind of lead us off into a direction with?
Well, I might mention Carolyn's question there about do male bears stay together or do they have their own territories? And really, once they reach sexual maturity at about 3.5 years old, they kind of do their own thing. And so once an area gets full of bears, so to speak, and really the females get to decide, territories. And so they have the smallest territory. They stay in that territory where they basically were born. And then the males, these females will share their territory with their offspring, females in particular, and males until the males reach sexual maturity. And once they start competing for females, then they get kicked out and they take off looking for new territory or new habitat. And so that's why you have bears that leave the park. They go out searching for new territories and other female too. So typically your young males, the ones that's going to be on the move, they're the ones that's going to be kind of out in front investigating a new territory.
Kim, I'll answer Delaroy's question. Do male bears
hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, they do. Now again, bear hibernation is not typical what you think of with a true hibernator. A true hibernator is something like a groundhog. Most of those true hibernators, when they go to sleep in the wintertime, their respiration drops, their heart rate drops, their body temperature drops. So a true hibernator, their body temperature drops about 60 degrees. They're literally just above freezing. So you could pull a ground squirrel out of its hibernation, and it's going to take a day or so for them to wake up because they got to bring that body temperature back up. And so they're literally in like a frozen coma-like state. Black bears don't do that. Black bears, we still say they hibernate, but it's a different kind of hibernation. That's why I say they're like super sleepers, because their heart rate drops, their respiration rate drops, but their body temperature usually only drops about 7 degrees. They're still in the low 90s. That's why when you walk up to a bear den in the wintertime, they're usually, they can wake up. They're a little slow. They're a little groggy because they're in a really deep sleep. They're cold. But it doesn't take them near as long as a true hibernator to wake up. But male bears do the same thing. Generally, female bears go in the den earlier than male bears, and they stay later. And so male bears definitely do hibernate, but they're more sporadic. They definitely can wake up, wander around. They don't have this obligation of the the newborn cubs to deal with. And so they're a little more sporadic with their hibernation. But absolutely, especially if it's a bad winter, they'll go ahead and be in a den for 3-4 months, no problem. And we're talking about East Tennessee. In some of those colder climates in the Rockies and Canada that you have extended winters, they'll be in the den for 5-6 months, sometimes even 7 months in those extreme northern areas. So with that, I think let's move along. Let's tell another story, and then we can hit another round of questions.
Sure. Daryl, I might contrast that with bears on the coast, let's say over the Atlantic, over North Carolina, or down in Florida. They may just sleep, on top of the ground, have a day bed. They may sleep and not even actually, have a den, so to speak, like we would have in the Smokies. So it's just it really depends. Let me say one thing about this hibernation thing. Let's say, for example, bears in zoos and things like that, how do they get them to hibernate? Do they do it on their own? Well, really, they start pulling food away from them. And when they do that, they start to get sleepy. So bears are wired in a way that Mother Nature has basically let them know that the wintertime is going to be a hard time. The food's going to be very scarce. And so typically when that food source starts to diminish, then they start going down. Now, can you keep a bear awake? Absolutely. If you kept him an adequate source of food throughout the entire winter, he may not go to sleep at all. So that's why we have some bears in Gatlinburg that are urban bears that may not sleep at all. They stay awake the entire time if they have a consistent source of natural or unnatural foods. So that's kind of a little bit more about that. So let's switch gears here. I'll tell. Look at the time right here. I'll tell you a couple things. We have captured a lot of bears in the Smokies. I'll tell you, in 1989, I handled 90 some odd bears in one year, which was a lot of bears for that particular year. And so we use drugs, of course, when we free range capture those. We use a dart. We have two drugs. The two drugs are xylazine hydrochloride and ketamine hydrochloride. So we mix those two together. You mix those two together. They have a good synergistic effect. And so all your negative side effects are kind of negated, and it produces a really good anesthesia of those bears. So we darted a lot of bears. Typically, you can use twice as much drug and just keep the animal down for a longer period of time. I was just thinking we've had a few. Let me take it back. We had one situation where we dart elk with a drug called carfentanil. Carfentanil is an opioid. We know all the issues with opioids in our culture right now too, which is not very positive. But I'll tell you, this is kind of not related to bears, but it could be. This drug carfentanil has one drop can kill 80 people. So it's extremely potent. I could knock a 700 or 800 pound elk down with less than a cc of drug. So very, very potent. So we darted this elk outside the park. We had actually put it in a little trailer. Once we got it down, we rolled it or trailered it down to the cattle trailer. We stood this elk in the back of the cattle trailer. I got him up there, and typically I'd reverse the animal, get the animal up, and then we're ready to transport it away. Well, we talked so much about carfentanil, how dangerous that drug can be if it's if you're exposed to it. And so there was a guy in the back, pulled the elk in. He said, "Kim, hey, I think I've got some of that drug on my hand." And I said, "Look, sit down for a second." I said, "Sit down." I said, "So let me see your hand." He looked. I said, "Do you have any cuts on your hand?" He said, "No, I don't." I said, Did you rub your nose, or did you rub your eyes or anything like that?" He said, "No." I said, "Are you sure you didn't?" I kept looking at his hands, and I looked at the guy, and you could have heard a pin drop in that trailer after dark. And I said, "So-and-so, you do know you can't absorb that drug through your skin." And he looked at me for the longest time and said, "Are you sure?" So I thought back to my training course I went to, and I was hoping and praying I was sure. And I very confidently said, "Yes, I'm positive you cannot absorb it through your skin." He looked back and backed up and gave a big sigh. He said, "Well," he said, "I'm starting to feel better now." And so I think I talked him out of it. So psychologically, that drug basically had done something to him too. He had a tingly feeling over his body, but once we assured him that he was not exposed to it, he was okay. The drug we use on bears are not quite as potent at all. I'll tell you one story. This comes from Bear in the Backseat 2. First story in Bear in the Backseat 2. We had this bear in Chimney's picnic area, which is about 5 miles above park headquarters. So what I should have done, when I got the report, this bear's up there now, you need to come up here. So I should have got my drug kit, all my information, all my pulse syringes, my projector, and actually took off and went down to the wildlife building and got me a transfer cage, what I should have done. But I didn't do that. I had caught so many bears, my attitude was, what could go wrong? Well, things can go wrong. So I got up there, I darted the bear, I got it down. I had a Jeep there, was the only thing I had with me. So we kind of do a little dog and pony show. People want to come and get close to it. They want to touch it. They want to get their picture made with it. And we try to accommodate that the best we can. So I don't know how many people. 100, 150 people were there. I was running them through, telling everybody to wash their hands, make sure, answer questions and stuff to make sure they knew it wasn't dead. And so a lot of times when they start to come out from under the effect of the drug, I'll kind of pop my hands. And a lot of times their ears, when you do that, they'll twitch. You'll see them move a little bit. Or they might retract their leg a little bit. And so I thought, I've got to go. I said, I don't want to give it any more drug. I'd rather just put it in the back of the Jeep, take off down through there and get it to the wildlife building before it fully wakes up. Well, I put it in the back of the Jeep. I went flying down 441 towards park headquarters there near Gatlinburg. And I remember I got down to one part of the highway that they were doing construction, had a huge dip right there. And I went through this dip and bounced. And when my Jeep bounced to the dip, I looked at my rearview mirror, and lo and behold, the bear had woke, and actually was setting up in the back of the Jeep, looking at me in the rearview mirror. Now, ladies, you all know, men sometimes, they don't want to admit they've made a mistake or they've done something really dumb, but I had done something really dumb. So I pulled off the side of the road into a parking area there at Husky Gap, and I got out of the Jeep, I waved at people going by like everything was okay. And so I remember pulling my pants up, walking around. That bear was watching me as I walked around the Jeep. And I reached in to get the drug kit, and he lunged at me and didn't get me or anything, didn't actually bite me. But I was able to get my drugs and put it back, load another dosage in my pulse syringe, reach inside the Jeep, go to inject him with another dose, and finally let him go back to sleep. Well, he went down. I made sure he was secure, took him down the wildlife building, put him in the transfer cage, and I kept thinking, do I tell people about this or not? I said, I have made so many mistakes too. I don't need to tell everybody everything I've done wrong. Well, I did finally. It was about 6 months, I think, before I told anybody what I'd done. So, but I did finally fess up later on, told them that what I'd done. But from that point on, you better believe I had a transfer cage behind my vehicle whenever I went to capture a bear, because I found out what would go wrong. The first book, Bear in the Backseat 1, starts out with a bear in the back of a helicopter. And I had hiked in to Siler's Ball Shelter on the AT, had a bear that was causing havoc with campers there. And I had caught the bear, and I called communication. I said, look, send the helicopter up here. I've got her down right now. So here comes the helicopter, and so we carry the bear by hand up to the little LZ right there, the loading zone for the helicopter. Really, really strong winds that day. I really had a pretty healthy fear of helicopters, and I didn't know this, but the pilot had a very healthy fear of bears. So I was worried about the helicopter, and the winds, and because we'd had several crashes in the park before. We had people who were permanently disabled from helicopter crashes. So I had those fears kind of jumping around in my head. And so he finally landed, and we put the bear in the back seat of the helicopter. And I saw him taking the doors off. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm taking the doors off. I said, but we have a bear in the back seat. He said, that's exactly right. That's why I'm taking the doors off. I'm not going to close the bear up in my helicopter. I said, look, don't worry about it. If the bear wakes up, I'll deal with the bear. You just worry about flying his helicopter. So I remember him starting to rev the RPMs on the helicopter. He kept getting stronger and stronger and higher and faster and faster. And it started shaking. The wind was so strong it was keeping us down on the ground. And he was pushing us down, and I mean, he was really revving the engine up, and I was white as a sheet. And so he kept turning around and looking at the bear. I said, "Sir, do not worry about the bear. You keep your eyes on the road, and you fly this thing out of here too." So when he picked that helicopter, the right skid come off of the ground. I was on my side. I was watching it. That helicopter slid sideways off into North Carolina. And it was like gyrations. It was like going like this right here, just back and forth. So I thought for sure we were going to crash. So finally he got control of it, and we went back into Tennessee and headed down towards Gatlinburg to landing zone there too. And he kept looking around. And I didn't know what to say. I don't think I could have said anything to him. But he said, "What about the bear?" I said, "Sir, forget the bear. Forget the bear. You just get us on the ground and everything will be fine." And so he landed. We got the bear, put it in my vehicle too. The pilot that I never met before didn't say, "Nice to meet you. Hope you do well. Hope we meet again." He got in his helicopter and he left, and I never saw him ever again. So that was good for me too. So, but that's kind of one that could have gone bad.
I love the fact that as you're talking, it just spurs these memories.
Mel, do you have anything you want to say here?
Long forgotten. But mentioning transporting a bear, we had one situation where we had a bear at ABR that was going to the Nashville Zoo, and it's driving me nuts because I can't remember the exact situation or the bear. But you have to understand, back in the late 1990s, the Bear Center at that time was we're struggling. We didn't have gear, we didn't have equipment. And so every once in a while I was asked to transport a bear, and I just had a little old Jeep Wrangler. And there was no way we were going to be able to transport this bear all the way from Knoxville all the way to Nashville. And the Knoxville Zoo said, "Don't worry, we'll help you out. We have this van that you can use to transport this bear to Nashville." And I said, "Fantastic, that's great." And so I drove up there, and we loaded this bear. And now it was in a little cage. It wasn't a very big bear. I think it was only about 40 or 50 pounds. But we put the cage just in the back of the van, and I was to take that van and drive it all the way to Nashville to deliver it. You know what? It may not have been an ABR cub. It was just a bear that was going to Nashville, and so I had to transport this bear. Not many people on this earth have the luxury of driving around with a bear in the back of your vehicle. And so as I was leaving the Knoxville Zoo's parking lot, the van, I thought the Bear Center was struggling, but the Knoxville Zoo, this van was not in much better shape, and it just sounded really bad. And I was just hoping I made it to Nashville. So lo and behold, I get on the highway, and I'm in the middle of downtown Knoxville, and every once in a while, there's lots and lots of traffic. Well, it just so happened to be one of those days. And so I'm on I-40 in the middle of downtown Knoxville, stuck in traffic, things are going slow, and all of a sudden I hear a big kerplunk, and the van begins to stall out. And so I was able to maneuver it onto the shoulder of I-40, but this is smack dab in the middle of downtown Knoxville. And so I'm panicky. This is way before the days of cell phones being very popular, but I did have a phone that I was able to call, and I was going to just call a tow truck. But before I made that call, most major cities have those highway patrol to help out motorists in need, and they saw this van on the side of the road, and they stopped to help me out, and I was so very thankful for that. But I got out of the car first and went up to the guy, and I told him, I said, "Sir, this probably isn't going to be like a typical call that you have." And he's like, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, the van here, I need help. It's not moving, but I have a bear in the back of it." And he's like, "No way." I said, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "I don't believe it." And so I had to show, and he went up there and looked in, and he could not believe it, that there was this van broken down with a bear in the back of the van. And so it was the coolest thing. He got back on the radio, and literally within 15 minutes, I had every emergency vehicle there to, besides giving me a tow to get a different vehicle, I had this escort through through downtown Knoxville because I had this bear in the back of the van. So there are some perks for working with wildlife. If you've got a bear in the back of your vehicle and you happen to break down in the middle of rush hour, you tend to get help much quicker. So as much as they helped me, I think I provided one of the highlights of their job to be able to come and see a bear in a car somewhere. But it's definitely fun when you've got to deal with some of these wild animals and you find yourself in situations you never dreamed of, and you just have to adapt and figure out what to do to overcome the situation. So with
Daryl, I might throw another story kind of related to when I was talking about bears kind of waking up unexpectedly. I had a case where I had a bear, a male bear. It was on Sunday afternoon. I had enough bears. I really didn't have to worry about somebody helping me. We had to pay overtime. So I said, what could go wrong? So anyway, I had this bear, and we had it in the wildlife built in the summertime because it's air conditioning. So bears that are anesthetized, or just like people, they have a hard time to thermoregulate. A lot of times they'll get too hot or they may get too cold. Summertime they're going to get too hot. They're a dark animal too. It knocks out some of their ability to breathe and pant the heat off, so they'll overheat. And so I had this bear on a stainless steel table, and I was in the wildlife building by myself on Sunday afternoon. Had the door open there because it was pretty warm outside. So I was talking to one of the rangers, and I was trying to figure out where I was going to release this bear in the park. And so anyway, I was talking to him, and I hit something on the desk. I forgot what I hit. Hit something, and when I did, I saw the bear jerk its head a little bit. And I said, Jack, I'm going to need to go. This bear's starting to wake up. And so I put the phone down, and when I put the phone down, it made a pretty loud noise, and the bear jumped up on that table and looked down at me at the desk there. So he was standing there looking down on me, and I looked over where my drug kit was, and it was on the other side of the room. So I knew I couldn't do anything but just sit really still and hope and pray that he went the other direction. So thank heavens, up above, I had that door open. He fell off of the table onto the floor, got up and started walking towards the door and lumbered out the door kind of in slow motion. And so I really quickly got up there, and there wasn't anybody at this is where our wildlife building is located in the maintenance area. There's a fence all the way around it, but no one was there on Sunday afternoon, thank heavens. So this bear's lumbering up through the maintenance area there too. So I got another dart loaded, and I took up through there and finally caught up with him up near the gas pumps, and I darted him, and he went to sleep right near the gas pumps. And so I pulled my vehicle up there, put him back in the cage, took him back down there. It was a few months before I told anybody that story as well too, but I finally fessed up. So that was kind of another situation where a bear broke up pretty unexpected.
But when you were talking before about
I'll tell you one
carfentanil, the drug, I too have had some experience. We were using carfentanil with the elk that we were doing, but we had the job of darting a number of elk over at Land Between the Lakes, and we had to round up all those elk because we were preparing another release in Tennessee. We had to quarantine every single animal within that enclosure. For those that don't know, LBL is Land Between the Lakes. It's what is it classified as far as a national park, or it's federal property, but they have this 1 square mile enclosure that has a number of elk in it as well as bison. And we had to round up all the elk, and we took the training regarding the carfentanil, and we were instructed how dangerous it was to expose yourself to it. You don't want to touch it at all. And we had spent a day or so darting elk, and the next day, one of the guys that was helping us, he didn't think his dart gun was working too well, and so he asked if he could practice in the back. And so I had a piece of cardboard, and I set it up, but the wind was blowing, and it was blowing the cardboard over. So I always drink Diet Pepsi, so I had this big 12-pack of, actually I think it was a 24-pack of Diet Pepsi, and I stood it up because it was so heavy that it wasn't going to be blown over by the wind, and I put that cardboard up and I wedged it in so his target wouldn't move, because he was just going to throw a couple of practice darts to make sure his dart gun was still working. And so he loaded up a practice dart, and he took aim, and he fired at the target, and it just sounded weird. And Kim, you may have done this before. Have you ever accidentally loaded 2 darts? But he didn't realize he still had the dart with the carfentanil loaded in there, and his gun shot 2 darts. The first one being the carfentanil, it hit my 24 pack of Diet Pepsi and exploded, and so I lost all the drinks I had that trapping experience because I had carfentanil all over the cans in my Diet Pepsi. So anyway, does anyone have any questions about anesthetizing animals? This is definitely Kim's bailiwick, or not bailiwick, but this is his area of expertise because Kim teaches these classes. So any questions about darting or anesthetizing any of these black bears? Go ahead and ask a question if you got them.
While they're doing that, I may tell you one story. Of course, I said during the 1990s we brought in red wolves and tried to reestablish red wolves into the park, and so we had red wolf acclimation pens. This is where we brought animals that were from a facility somewhere, captive facility, put them in there, and we fed them deer carcasses, hog carcasses, and things like that. And I never forget, we had a bear that had put 2 and 2 together, and so he was actually climbing up a tree on the outside of the fence, running out one limb onto another limb on the inside of tree for the inside of the fence, and actually coming down, and it was actually picking up deer carcasses and hog carcasses and carrying them out and dragging them off and eating them. So we were actually running out of food for the red wolves too. So I thought, you know what, we got to change this behavior. We have to make the negative experience of that bear here greater than the positive experience. That's how you keep bears away from developed areas. And so sure enough, we went out there, we trapped the big bear. He was a big male. So I reversed him, and I see a copy there, reversal. I'll talk about that in a second. So the drug we use, rompamine ketamine, you really have to wait until the ketamine metabolizes, excuse me, and then after about 40 minutes, then you can reverse the xylazine and the bear will wake up. Well, we waited for the ketamine to kind of lose its potency. We reversed it with a reversal for the xylazine, which really just is like a tranquilizer. He was starting to wake up, so he was trying to run away from us. So I thought, you know what? I'll make sure he remembers me. He remembers us. So I was chasing this bear with a big old switch, kind of hitting the ground behind him, and he would run and kind of lumber himself onto. And so I kept on running, thinking I was yelling at him. I was going to make sure he never came back ever again. And so the guy who was with me said, I remember seeing the bear kind of getting more mobile as the farther he got away, and I could see him running into the woods away from where I couldn't see him. Then I saw you going in behind him. And he said, just about 30 seconds after that, I remember seeing you come running wide open back out of that trail, down the trail, and the bear was behind me. So he had reversed enough that he got tired of me chasing him, and he reversed the situation too, and he chased me back all the way back to the pen. So I'm very fortunate that I wasn't actually could been used for wolf food at one of the pens there too. So in that regard there too, that the bear had done the right thing. But yeah, reversals we do. We have a reversal for carfentanil. It's called naltrexone. Naltrexone is kind of like Narcan, except it lasts longer. And we use a drug called yohimbine, which reverses the xylazine component of a ketamine xylazine. So yeah, we can reverse that. And so when people are abusing those drugs too, ketamine is a drug that they actually put it in drinks and stuff too, and it's a lot of times it's involved in rape cases and things like that. So it's a schedule. It's a Schedule 3 drug. So yeah, there are reversals.
Whenever you sedate an animal, and I usually wasn't the person administering the drugs. We usually had folks from the Park Service or from TWRA that were administering the drugs. But just so everyone knows, when you put a bear down, we're usually really, really careful with what we're doing because, especially when I was working at the Bear Center, when that animal goes down, we'll be monitoring its vital signs if we could. One of the biggest things that you got to be very mindful of, especially if you sedate a bear during the summertime, is them overheating. Now, they typically carry a higher body temperature than humans. They're upward around 99 degrees, even higher than that. But because of the black fur and being summer and warm, and the fact that some of these drugs do not allow them to expel that heat, they can overheat really quickly. And so we'll constantly monitor their temperature. Sometimes we've been known to like dump water on them to cool them off, but we're usually very, very careful sedating that animal. Obviously, when you get into cooler weathers where it's not as hot, usually you don't run into those problems. But I will tell you, all the professionals I worked with, from Ken to Bill Stiver to all the TWRA folks, they're fantastic as far as the care for the animal. And you've probably seen pictures from the Bear Center when we're immobilizing an animal, its health is the number one thing. And very rarely do we have bad situations, but it doesn't mean it doesn't occur. Every once in a while it happens. But I do want to address, Jeannie had a question when she said, when you have bears that cannot be released, whether for health or acclimation reasons, how do you select and approve the sanctuaries where you place them? I will tell you right now, it is a rarity that we ever place an animal into a sanctuary. Now, I was fortunate a couple of times in my career where we found a place to put a bear, but the main reason we don't do it or we can't do it is there is a law in Tennessee that more or less says you can't take a bear from the wild and put it into a sanctuary. If that occurs, you're literally jumping through hoops trying to get all the proper authorizations from TWRA to the Park Service to wherever that bear came from. But it's not easy because it's usually not permitted, and so you have to go to really high-ranking channels to allow that to happen. Now, we have been fortunate. One story, and I would love to tell this story if we have time, but we might not have time. But we were able to place one bear into a sanctuary down in Georgia. But for the most part, when I was there, it's not an option, and I'm sure Janet can chime in. It's not an option to get a bear, find out it's non-releasable, and then find a home for it. You literally can't find homes. Zoos are usually filled up, and so there's usually no vacancies. And this is why it's so critically important that we do the best to, first of all, ensure that bears never need that rehabilitation. And so we do our part to make sure that we're not the cause of a bear getting injured or needing that rehab facility. And I know that's not possible in all situations. But secondly, and this comes into the rehab side of things, we have to do everything in our power to make sure we're able to release that bear once again, because that's the best life for the bear. Putting a bear in a zoo, it killed me to do that, because a bear does not thrive well in a zoo, especially if it came from the wild. And so I'm one of those guys that I would so much rather have a bear in the wild, even if it's struggling. It deserves a life in the wild. And so we tend not to even think about that sanctuary route, and it's only in a very rare case that ever happens.
Dale, I might throw in one story here too. You know, we had it seemed like everything happens on a Sunday afternoon, but I got home on Sunday afternoon after church one day and got a call and said, hey, there's been a bear attack up at Newfound Gap. And Newfound Gap is it's where 441, Highway 441 crosses the park right at the Tennessee, North Carolina boundary, and it's right where the Appalachian Trail crosses as well too. And I said, what happened? So they said there was a bear up in the parking lot at Newfound Gap, and there was an elderly lady there too, and the bear ran over and grabbed her leg and would not let go of her leg. I said, did it injure her? He said, no, it just would not let go of her leg. And I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. So she's not injured. She was able to get away from the bear. But so we went up there and actually caught that bear too, and got the bear down and looked at it. We went ahead and to immobilize it or anesthetize it. And actually, it didn't have any claws at all. It had been a captive animal that had been released. And what happened, we had found out that in North Carolina, they were going to, all the people who had black bears in captivity, they were going to come and confiscate those. So they had a date that they said, up to this point right here, were coming getting all of them. And you know what happened. They said that, oh, they escaped, or, come out and the door's open and they're gone. And I felt pretty confident someone in North Carolina had taken that bear and released it in the park thinking it's going to live, happily ever after. Without claws, it's not going to happen. So this was a pet. This was a bear that was in captivity, and it was lonely. It just wanted to be next to somebody. And it saw this lady, and it ran her down and grabbed her leg, and they said she was screaming. She was dragging this bear latched onto her leg across the parking lot. Well, she finally got away from it. We caught it. And so I didn't feel good about putting that bear down. I put other bears down that I didn't have any other choice, especially if they're injured, just kind of a good Samaritan act. But I found a private zoo that had just lost their bear to cancer up in Parker City, Indiana. And you better believe there was a lot of paperwork. And for that to happen back in the late 80s, early 90s, I couldn't imagine now how much paperwork would be involved. But we actually did take that one bear that was a captive bear with no claws that could not be released back in the wild. We took it up to Parker City, Indiana, and put it in that facility up there. Okay, I'll answer a couple things here.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to answer a couple here from Lori about Okay, a couple here. One from Lori. Is there a difference between sedated and immobilized? There is. There's a big difference. Some drugs just sedate the animal. The more you give it, the higher the dose, the more sedation it is. The problem is there's negative effects. So that's what happens when you give an animal too much drug. For example, like xylazine. What happens? It knocks out the CO2 receptors in the brain, and the CO2 starts to rise in the body, and the body just doesn't know that it's rising, and so they basically don't breathe. And so when they don't breathe, they don't expel that heat, they get too hot, and they can die from hypothermia too. Immobilize, or really the same thing as anesthetize. Yeah, there's drugs that do knock them completely out. If they're completely under, you can do surgery on them as well. But the ones that are sedated, it just heavily sedates them. You mix those two drugs together, you kind of get the good feature of both drugs. So that's a good question too. What's the time limit? It depends on the drug. Sedation can last for 2 or 3 hours. Some drugs, like Delozier, they could be out, for an hour or so. It depends on the size of the animal. It depends on their temperament. If they're really wired, and you give them an injection of drug, it may not last very long. It may not work at all. But if they're very calm, you inject those two, they're going to go out, and they stay out longer. That's why when you go to the hospital for surgery, they don't want you to come in 30 minutes before. They want you to come in 2 hours before. The reason for that is they want you to calm down. They want you to calm down so that when they inject the drug on you, excuse me, that you're gonna go down a lot easier.
Okay, I'm going to jump in
that's
here.
That's why they have you come so quick.
What I was going to say,
or have you come, a couple hours.
Just so you know,
so good question.
Kim and I, we never rehearse these things, and it always makes me smile how his stories remind me of some of the stories I've had. And when he was talking about that bear that was latching onto the woman's leg, it reminded me, and some of you need to hear this story, and some of you, I'm sure, have already heard the story. But one of the bears I took care of, we had a call from Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency about this cub that they had captured way up northeast Tennessee. And so I hopped in the Jeep, and I drove up there to meet the wildlife officer to take this cub back to the center for rehab. And when I got there, I met him in the parking lot of an old Kmart up there. And I pulled up, and I had a cage in the back of my Jeep. I had a catch pole and heavy-duty gloves, and I was all prepared to transfer the cub from his cage into my cage, and then I could head back to the bear center. Well, lo and behold, I get there, and I pull out the catch pole, I put the gloves on, and the officer looked at me. He says, "You ain't going to need that." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Watch this." And he opened the door to the cage in his truck, and that cub came running out and jumped into his arms. And he held onto that cub, and the cub was it was like a little baby in his arms. And as soon as I saw that, my heart sank. because the bear center is not supposed to take habituated cubs. And I didn't know what to do, but I made a phone call, and we made the decision to take that cub. So we loaded this bear into the cage of my Jeep, and I was heading back to the bear center. And I was worried. I didn't know what to do because this would be one of those really tough situations about trying to release this bear back into the wild, knowing how habituated it was. And so as I'm driving back to the bear center, the cub was coughing. It was wheezing and it was coughing. And wild bears generally don't wheeze and cough. And so right away I knew something was wrong with it. So I made another phone call, got all the clearance that I needed, and I took the bear right to the University of Tennessee Medical Center. And Dr. Ed Ramsey examined it. And I was there for a few hours, and they did everything, all these x-rays, and trying to figure out what was wrong with this cub. Ed came out of the examination room. He says, I got pretty bad news for you. The cub has aspiration pneumonia, which some of you may know. Aspiration pneumonia can be caused by improper bottle feeding. What it is you get liquids inside the lungs, and they develop pneumonia. And it can be pretty severe. And from what he said from the x-rays and everything, this was really severe in this bear cub. And as I loaded up the cub to take back to the bear center, Ed gave me some antibiotics for it. And he said, hey, Daryl, I just want to prepare you. There's a really good chance the cub's not going to make it through the night. And so that was kind of a shock because I wasn't anticipating any of this. So I drove that cub back to the bear center, and I took him in the cage down to the maintenance building, which is that red brick building at ABR right now. And I put him down there, and I was just feeling really bad for this cub because some yeehaw messed this cub up. They tried raising it by hand, they did it wrong, and they doomed this bear cub. And so I figured, you know what, this may very well be the last day that this cub has. And so instead of giving the typical bear food like apples and things that they would find naturally, I kind of broke the rules, and I went up. I got some really good stuff that I'm sure the bear was going to like because I just wanted to make him comfortable. And so I fed him that stuff, and he really enjoyed it. And so after a while, I gave him his medicine, and it was already getting about 8 o'clock at night, so I went back up to the trailer, and I shut off the lights in the maintenance building, and I closed the door, and I walked away. And as I'm walking away, I could hear this cub bawling because he was so comforted by my presence. And so I walked back up to the trailer, I grabbed something to eat, and I sat down in the living room in the recliner, and I said, you know, all I could think about was that cub. I couldn't live with myself knowing that the bear died alone when he was comforted by me. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go back down there and just spend some time with that cub. And so I went back down there, and he was still in the cub, and as soon as he saw me, he cheered up. And so I sat down by his cage, and he was only about 30 pounds or so. And so I took my finger, I didn't let him out, I took my finger and I just put it up to the cage, and he was like suckling it because he was raised by humans. He just wanted to be around humans. And so he was doing that humming sound. If you've ever heard a cub nurse, when they're very content and happy, they'll be humming because they're comforted. And so against my better judgment, I said, you know what, I'll never get this chance again because we don't handle bears that way at the bear center. And so I decided to open up the cage door and just I saw the officer comfort this bear. And so as soon as I opened up the door, he jumped into my arms, and he literally just curled up in my arms. And he was just so at peace in my arms. And I was sitting there thinking, this is the coolest thing in the world. So I hung out with him for a while. And it was getting late at night. It was probably 11:30 at night. And finally, I was starting to fall asleep. And so I'm like, well, he's very calm right now. I'm going to put him back in the cage and then hopefully go back up to where I was living. And so I picked him up, and he noticed I was picking him up, and he didn't want to go back in the cage. And this cage just had a little square door, and I go to put him in, and he grabbed all four paws on all four corners of that door, and I was pushing on it. It was like a trampoline trying to push him in there, and he did not want to go, and he was hanging on, and I couldn't get him to let go. And I struggled with him for a good while, and finally he turned around and grabbed my leg, and he squeezed. And that was when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm with a bear here that does not want to go back in the cage. And so I looked around, and I found a canvas and an old blanket on the shelves in that maintenance building. This time I made sure the maintenance door was locked so I didn't lose another cub. But I spread it out, and I just laid down there, and this cub was just wandering around. He just wanted to be near me. Lo and behold, finally the sleepiness overcame me, and I fell asleep. And I was asleep for a few hours. Would you believe I woke up as the sun was coming up, and I'm just getting to my senses, and I'm laying on that tarp, and my arm was outstretched before me, and there was this little cub asleep on my arm. And if I thought it was cool having the bear, to be able to wake up spooning a bear, is something that I don't know if there's anyone else in this entire world that has done that. But I woke up, and he was literally asleep in front of me. I put him back in the cage, and he was still doing fine. Lo and behold, that cub survived. And I kept giving him the antibiotics, and we nursed him back to health. But the thing was, this bear could not be released. If Kim told that story about the bear grabbing on that woman's leg, I guarantee if you released this bear, it would do the same thing. And so it was difficult for a few months. I think it went on for 3 or 4 months. We were getting the door closed on us all over the place, trying to find a sanctuary or a zoo or a location where this bear could go. Fortunately, after many months, and I've got to thank Walter Cook at Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, he located a place for us in Georgia. And we ended up sending that bear to the sanctuary because it definitely was unreleasable. But anyway, it amazes me how some of Kim's stories kind of spark my memory, and they play off each other. So with that being said, it is getting to the point where we've been going at it for almost 2 hours. We can answer a few more questions, but it's up to you guys. We probably don't want to go more than 2 hours, but if there's any other questions you want to ask us that we can answer, we'd be more than happy to do that.
I tell you what, Daryl, I may throw one mother and cub story or two that talk about whether mothers are very protective of their cubs or will they desert their cubs. We caught a mother with 3 cubs out of Cosby Campground because she was getting close to camper. So we took her to park headquarters there at the wildlife building. We put her in the cage there too, and until we decided where we were going to relocate her to, which would have been outside the park. Well, sometime during the night, she apparently actually didn't like staying inside that. So this is a 9-gauge fabric, 9-inch chain link fence fabric that is very, very strong too. And she was able to start pulling those links and distorting those links where she pulled those far enough apart that she could get her head through. And so if a bear can get their head through it, typically their body's going to be able to follow. So we actually, Bill Stiver, I think he said that he was at the wildlife building. If I'm not mistaken, he said he heard something. He went out and looked at it. This bear had actually separated the links on the chain link fabric, and it was climbing out, and it took off. And it went out the window of the wildlife building, went through the maintenance area, across the fence, was gone. So we thought for sure that, maybe we would find her, maybe we wouldn't, or if we didn't, we're going to have 3 orphan cubs on our hands. So typically what we do is, if that happens, we think the mother's going to come back to the cubs. And so we put a trap on the outside of the maintenance area, and we trapped that for 3 or 4 days, 3 days I think it was, with no success at all. she did not come back. So we felt pretty confident that she had deserved the cubs. Lo and behold, I get a call from one of the rangers at Cosby, and that mother bear apparently went back to the exact same campsite that I had caught her before, a few days before, and they called me and said, there's a bear out here. I said, does she have an ear tag? Yes, she does. I said, can you get the number? He said, I can't tell. I went out and actually caught her, and I'll be darned if it wasn't the same mother that had broken out from the cage of the wildlife building. We brought her back, reunited her with her cubs, and then relocated the family group too. So in that case, she didn't come back. At least if she did, she didn't get caught. But in other cases, they'll typically will come back and try to retrieve their cubs if they can. So that's kind of another story that worked out for the good, even though it didn't go very well for a while.
I'm going to ask if you guys have any more questions. We want to make sure we answer all your questions.
Anything popped up here?
I think I'm going to get out of this PowerPoint, the slideshow presentation, because I've got a couple of slides to show you, because I got to thank some of the wildlife photographers that were here. But now's your chance to ask questions so we can begin wrapping. I would stay with you guys 3 or 4 hours, but I know it's a long evening. Just so you know, everybody who's on this presentation or who's participating here, I'm going to email you a copy of the recording, so you'll be able to go back and listen and share it if you want. But I got to call up a different presentation so I can show you a couple of slides. But if you have any last-minute questions, by all means type them, and we'll try to make sure we get them all answered before we wrap it up tonight.
Daryl, I might say for the ones that participate too, I appreciate your time and effort and your eagerness to learn more about bears. They're just amazing creatures. Someone mentioned about a tremendous homing instinct. Yeah, I didn't tell the story of Bear 75 that traveled over 1,500 air miles to try to get back to his home in Cades Cove there in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It's just unbelievable. I mean, haul a bear 6 hours away, 400 miles away, and he's sound asleep the entire time. And then when he gets there and they release him, he jumps out of the truck, runs a few yards away from the vehicle, and starts kind of bobbing his head, trying to get his senses, and he immediately starts going to the south and travels 10 to 12 miles south every day. I mean, how do they know how to do that? It just amazes me that they are that smart and they are built, to survive. And so I've been pretty fortunate
some of the questions,
to have the crew that I have too, and I'm really happy to share some time with you guys tonight.
Lori asked one about if females will always den if they're pregnant, if food is prevalent. If you could think about that answer. While you're doing that, the bear slides you've been looking at, I've been blessed to know some amazing wildlife photographers. And in particular, these folks listed here, Bob Howdeshell in Maryville, Rita Russell, Nancy Haddock, Neil Jernigan, and Shannon Schuler-Gaskins. Shannon was on tonight. I thank you all for some of the pictures that we've been able to share throughout this presentation as Kim and I talked about our bear stories. A couple of the pictures actually myself and Kim have taken. But I will tell you, Kim has mentioned it before. He does have these 2 books out, the Bear in the Backseat 1 and 2, and he's got other books on the way. By all means, read them. Fantastic, fantastic reads, and you'll enjoy them, and there's a whole lot more stories about those. Kim, if you want to mention anything else about these books or any books coming out.
Well, I might mention that these are short stories. They're really, Carolyn had told me beforehand that our biggest readers will be middle-aged women. And it's really, I may describe the book as it's not in order. You could pick Bear in the Backseat too and read that before one. So they're not any kind of order. You have to purchase the first one or the second one. But really, it's stories that are easy. It's written in spoken dialect. It's really books for people who don't like to read. Typically, you'll have the wife will be laying in bed reading the book, and she'll start laughing. There's a tremendous amount of humor associated with most all the stories. At my expense, I might add too, which is okay. But they'll be reading, they'll be laughing, and the husband will say, well, what are you reading? And he said, she'll read the story, and they'll start reading the book and actually read the book as well. The best compliment I think I've got from anyone, I had a boy that struggled in school. He was he graduated from high school just barely, but he actually got one of the books and he was reading. He was so excited. He said, I'm reading your book, and I absolutely love it. And I saw him a short time later, and he said, I finished reading your first book. I'm getting the second book right now. He said, it took me a long time to read it. He said, really, I struggled with reading. And he said, I really struggled in school. And he kind of looked down at the ground. He looked around. He said, well, to tell you the truth, it's the first book I've ever read cover to cover in my entire life. So that made me feel really good.
Okay,
It was
question about
something I thought was worthwhile, and I was really proud that he had that opportunity to read
it. That, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I think they'll be in a den, depending on what a den is. Like I said, on the coast or in Florida, they may have a day bed where they may curl up or whatever, or they may make a kind of a nest, so to speak, too. The ones in the park, when I said what's unique about the park bear is that they will climb up a tree. They'll be 30, 40 feet off the ground, and they'll actually have their cubs in a hollow section of a older tree there as well. So, yeah, I think they're going to be in when they do that. Just more protection. It's just amazing. The whole concept of basically of hibernation just is really amazing how they can do what they do. I think if we understood that much better, I think we would be able to
now, I did
deal
mention,
with
I teach a whole
cancer and disease and things like that a lot better. So I think there's a lot there for us to learn.
When bears go into the den, they can wake up after the hibernation, and they may lose up to 30% of their body weight. And what is so cool is almost all of it is fat. They barely lose any muscle. So think about humans that are bedridden. One of the first things that they lose is muscle. The body starts burning that muscle, but bears do the opposite. They burn the fat. If the medical world could understand and kind of master how that occurs, think about that. If you're dealing with any weight issues and you literally go to sleep and you just burn fat in your sleep, this is why bears do some amazing things that are still to this day they're not understood very well because we don't know how it occurs. There was another question. I want to make sure I get all these questions. Janice said, Teresa asked a question earlier about a cub returning to the wild and seeing the mom again, and if the mom would take the cub back. I think a lot of that would probably depend on the age of the cub and how long they've been separated. I don't know. I would. Jim, would you have?
I might add something to that. Keep in mind, a lot of times these cubs are kicked out or pushed out by the mother just before breeding season. So they're almost a year and a half old, and the mother's going to rebreed, and so she's going to kick them out. She's going to put them out. So if you have a bear that's orphan or whatever, and you keep it for a period of time, you're going to get closer to that period of where she would wean the animals anyway, and she's not going to accept it, even if she knew who it was, just because she's ready to move on with her life and rebreed and get ready for the next cubs coming around the first of the year. That's a good. I hate she asked me that with Carolyn on the in a group right here too. But hopefully we're going to have one out this year. I hope we're going to have one later on this year. Hopefully by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's a good time to release books. So if we do, it's because of Carolyn's been pushing me, and if we don't, it's my fault.
And this is going to be my last.
We'll do our best. Thanks a lot for asking.
Thank you.
Appreciate all the good comments people had about
this
Bear in the Backseat
program
books.
that we're developing. It's called Wildlife for You. We are working on a website. In fact, we've got some more work done on it this past week. It'll be wildlifeforyou.com. Don't go there yet because we haven't opened it up. But what that place will offer is it's going to show you all the different webinars and classes that we teach, as well as all the different instructors. Not just going to be me, not just going to be Kim. There's going to be other instructors we're getting on board. and a whole myriad of topics, ranging from bears to wolves to birds to fish. And so it's going to be a place where folks can go and get that intermediate mix of wildlife information that they need. It'll be that tamed down from that technical stuff, but it's not going to be the Hollywood stuff that might not have really good scientific information. Hopefully we create and strike that perfect balance of entertaining information that is accurate about wildlife, because that's what wildlife needs. In fact, my title page there was Wildlife, Your Knowledge Equates to Their Existence. And so I will tell you, hopefully I'm crossing my fingers within a month or two that website will be up. But in the meantime, most of you know about it, but you can go to Facebook, type in Wildlife for You, and you can see when the classes are coming up. Kim and I were talking earlier about doing another class. We'll work on a date, but I don't have anything scheduled right yet, but within a week I'll announce the next class that we'll teach. Hopefully we'll have announcements for a couple of classes. But by all means, please go there and provide comments. If you enjoyed this class, that's fantastic. If you didn't, that's fine. We're looking for feedback. What can we change to make things better? But we're here for you guys, and again, I'll speak for Kim. I think we enjoy speaking to you as much as you enjoy hearing us do the speaking. So it's an amazing world of wildlife that we've been blessed to be able to work with, and I plan on continuing this for another 20 years, God willing. And so, again, I appreciate everyone joining in, and by all means, follow us, and thank you so much for participating tonight. Kim, you have any last words?
No, just thanks. I appreciate everybody's comment too, and so I'm really excited, about the next one if we deal with bear encounters. I just think there's a misconceptions of how people read bears, what they're telling them as well too, and what you can do to counter an aggressive attack. I mean, so it doesn't happen very often, but the more educated you are, the more apt you're going to respond the right way and protect yourself or protect someone else too. So, got a lot of information about that too, about bear behavior, and so I'm looking forward to that.
So thanks again, everyone.
Webinar.
I will email out to everyone that registered. We'll be sending out a copy of the recording or a link to the recording. So thank you all, and I appreciate you guys so very much. I am going to